You have 2 doctors in Gaza who have 10 children and 9 of them are killed in a bombardment by your forces. All you're achieving at the moment is making Israel more and more of a global pariah. How come you know exactly how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, but you have no idea how many children you've killed?
Well, Piers, I can answer that question for her. And the person he's speaking to is Tzipi Hotovely, who is Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom. She doesn't know how many Hamas militants have been killed. You'll hear all sorts of inflated numbers coming from the Israeli government and the IDF. And she doesn't know how many children have been killed because she literally doesn't care. Anyway, so what you just watched was a compilation, some snippets of this interview that Piers Morgan had with Tzipi Hotovely, who, he seems to have a friendly relationship with otherwise. But in this instance, he had some pretty tough questions for her, and she didn't really know how to answer them. And the reason why this stood out to me is because for the longest time, Piers Morgan seemed to be trying to do like this both sides coverage of what's happening in Gaza. Now, it's been over a year and a half. So many Palestinian civilians have been killed. In the beginning of this war, the only thing that Piers Morgan seemed to care about was whether or not his guests on his show condemned Hamas. Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? I mean, yes, we all condemn Hamas. Hamas committed horrific atrocities on October 7th. It did nothing for the Palestinian people. It has led to the absolute destruction of the Gaza Strip, the slaughter of tens of thousands, at this point, probably more Palestinian civilians. It's just, yes, we all condemn Hamas. But at what point are you gonna wake up and realize that all of these children, all of these women, all of these elderly people, all of these civilians have now been killed by the IDF? And no one seems to be addressing that in mainstream press, in establishment legacy media. There's just some quick mentions, but never a real reckoning with what the current Israeli government is carrying out. You can address the atrocities of Hamas, but for whatever reason, the atrocities of the IDF seem to be absent from these debates and conversations. Well, not anymore. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that not one, but two former Israeli prime ministers in recent weeks, recent days, have come out to criticize how the government of Israel is prosecuting this war in Gaza. In fact, Morgan even started this episode by citing former Israeli prime ministers Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, someone we talked about earlier this week, who both criticized Israel's war on Gaza. So here's a little gem from Olmert himself.
The statements made by Israeli cabinet ministers, the leading cabinet ministers, that say we should starve Gaza. What is it if not a war crime? I mean, how can a serious person representing the Israeli government can spell it out in such an explicit manner that we should starve Gaza, that there should be no supply of basic fundamental humanitarian needs to a couple of million people living there? They are terrorists that we need to fight, but this is not a war against Hamas. This looks more and more like a political war of the Israeli prime minister and the cabinet and the group of thugs which are now representing the Israeli government inside Israel and across the world are committing actions which can't be interpreted in any other way.
I mean, that statement was very clear. And when you have former prime ministers speaking out against what the current Israeli government is doing, I think what that leads to is permission, honestly. Because look, when people like me or Cenk, pretty early on in this war, are willing to call balls and strikes and call out what we're seeing with our own 2 eyes as it's transpiring in Gaza, obviously, there's a lot of risk that comes with that. So I'm not going to get into specifics, but I know that Cenk has lost important business relationships and friendships over his criticism of the current Israeli government. People will call me whatever names they want to call me, but I'm used to it. I don't really care, right? I'd rather speak the truth and say what's actually on my mind as opposed to like placating or pleasing people. Other people, by the way, have lost jobs. I mean, there are some consequences. And I think that's what leads to some people maybe privately saying what they actually think, but publicly playing this both sides game that Piers Morgan has from the very beginning, but not anymore, because I think these former prime ministers in Israel have given him permission. And I'm glad they gave him permission, because finally he's addressing things that need to be addressed, including the high death toll among Palestinian children in Gaza. So he brings on Hotovely, again, that's the Israeli prime minister to the UK, who demonstrated a complete disregard for the tens of thousands of children in Gaza who have been killed from Israeli bombardment or starvation. Take a look.
Answer me that one question. Do you know how many Hamas terrorists you've killed and how many children you've killed? Do you know those two numbers?
I know the numbers that came from the IDF. I know the numbers that came from a very, very established
Give me the two numbers.
Wait a second. We killed 30,000. We killed 30,000 terrorists in phase 1 of the war. Since the war is back, I don't have the numbers. But let me tell you one thing.
How many children have you killed?
We never target civilians. So this question is irrelevant.
How many children have you killed?
Piers, Israel is not killing children. Israel is not killing children. Hamas is using them as human shields.
Israel is killing children every single day.
Piers, this is a blood label you're putting on Israel. You know it's not true.
No, it's not actually. And what you're trying to do is be very weaselly with your words.
No, I'm not.
The truth is, you are killing a lot of children.
Wow, Piers, look at that. Okay, all right. I mean, Miss Rachel, who does content for kids, was willing to call out what was actually going on earlier than you. But I give him a lot of credit. I actually do, because it was real satisfying to watch him ask her specifically the questions he was asking her. And it was satisfying to watch her flail, because maybe for the first time, she's being pressured to answer important questions about the high civilian death toll, especially as it pertains to children in Gaza. Now, she claims, laughably, that the IDF has killed 30,000 Hamas militants. 30,000, okay. And by the way, in the first phase of this war, they killed 30,000 Hamas militants. I don't believe her at all. Now, right now, the official death toll in Gaza, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, is around 56,000 people. Okay, let me just round up, or not even round up, I'm rounding down a little bit, but 56,000 people. Really? Out of 56,000 people who have been killed in Gaza, 30,000 of them are Hamas militants? In the beginning of this war, Israel claimed that there were 25,000 Hamas militants in Gaza. I mean, the numbers, they cite different numbers all the time. So the United Nations, which verified fatalities from 3 independent sources, by the way, found that 70% of the Palestinians killed were women and children. In March of 2024, Haaretz actually interviewed several standing IDF commanders and reserve commanders who cast doubt on Israel's official figures of how many terrorists it had killed. Okay, so you can read that piece for yourselves. One reserve officer told Haaretz that in practice, a terrorist is anyone the IDF has killed in the area in which its forces operate. So you kill a civilian, especially if it is a fighting age male, just chalk that up to a Hamas militant, even though there's no indication that that individual was actually a Hamas militant. A reserve officer who served in Gaza, by the way, gave Haaretz that quote. A senior officer in Southern Command also told Haaretz, "It's astonishing to hear the reports after every operation regarding how many terrorists were killed. You don't need to be a genius to realize that you don't have hundreds or dozens of armed men running through the streets of Khan Yunis or Jabalia fighting the IDF." By the way, in regard to actual figures of people who have been killed, 180 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza by the IDF. Humanitarian aid workers have also been targeted and killed. I don't know the exact numbers for that, so I'm not just going to pull a number out of my ass, but obviously we've covered very specific stories of humanitarian aid workers who have been targeted and killed, sometimes when they're traveling in vehicles that are perfectly marked to indicate that they're humanitarian aid workers. But Hotovely insists that Israel is following international law. Take a look.
The international humanitarian law says very clearly, as long as you're targeting civilian targets, you're allowed to attack hospitals if you know they're terrorists. No, but you're not answering my question. Israel is not deliberately killing children. And this accusation is a fake thing that you keep on saying again and again when you know we're a democratic country, cares about human life.
I just asked you a simple question.
At the same time, Hamas is deliberately using the children as human shields.
The idea that right now and throughout this war, the Israeli government and the IDF has been following international law is the most laughable thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, collective punishment violates international law. What do you think mass starvation is? What do you think the blockade of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip is? They have bombed every hospital. They have bombed every refugee camp. They have bombed every university. A university doesn't even exist. That's what the Turks did to Armenians during the genocide. They bombed every university. They specifically targeted scientists, doctors. How many doctors have been killed in Gaza? I didn't know that slaughtering journalists was okay under international law. Actually, it's not okay under international law. Targeting humanitarian aid workers also violates international law. What happened during this war was the complete dismantling of international law. Because why would any other country engaged in war give a damn about international law when there seems to be a massive pass for one country and one country only, and that's Israel? Israel can do whatever it wants, and because it has the globe's military superpower, the United States backing it, can do whatever it wants. But now people are speaking out, and Hotovely doesn't know what to do because she's not used to this. She's not used to anyone asking her these difficult questions. I mean, in the past, all she needs to do is accuse them of being anti-Semites and they'll shut up. Accuse them of repeating blood libel and they'll shut up because no one wants to be called an anti-Semite. But the fact of the matter is all sorts of people who are raising legitimate concerns of war crimes, of innocent people getting slaughtered, have just been slapped with the label anti-Semite to the point where that label doesn't mean much to anyone anymore. That's what people like Hotovely have done. And it sucks because I believe anti-Semites do exist. But it's harder to decipher who is and isn't an anti-Semite when you have people like Hotovely labeling people who aren't anti-Semites as anti-Semites because they have the audacity to call out the Israeli government and the IDF for the war crimes that they're currently engaged in. Luckily, Piers Morgan didn't buy anything she was selling. Let's watch.
The overriding picture, which is what's getting Israel so much opprobrium around the world, is that your strategy isn't working. There's no clear plan for what happens at the end of all this. Hamas is still clearly alive and well and thriving. Yes, you've killed another one of their leaders today, but you killed his brother who was the architect of October the 7th months ago, and that didn't seem to make any difference to Hamas's ability to continue engaging in battle with you. And the argument remains, how many Palestinian civilian innocent lives, women and in particular children, are you prepared to kill as you continue going after Hamas when it doesn't appear that you're winning that battle, that strategy is failing?
That strategy is failing, and nothing radicalizes an individual more than a military literally slaughtering every single member of their family. Oh my God, can you imagine? Can you imagine being a mother, being a doctor? You're working in a hospital in Gaza in a freaking war zone. You're doing your best to save other people's lives. And these tiny little bodies start showing up to the hospital. 7 of them. And every single one of those 7 little bodies happens to be your own children who just got killed in an Israeli airstrike. Then you find out 2 more of your children died in that airstrike. And you only have 1 child out of your 10 children who survived. How does that not radicalize people? I just don't understand the logic behind the people who are defending what Israel is currently doing. Okay, let's say you don't even give a damn about Palestinian lives. I think you're a bad person, but okay, let's just say you don't care about Palestine. All you care about is Israel. Okay, how is this good for Israel? How is it good for Israel to act in a manner that turns the entire international community against them? All that goodwill toward Israel gone because of what's happening on the ground in Gaza. And by the way, the West Bank as well. And I want to end on that. Because if you think the persecution and the terrible treatment of Palestinians only exists in Gaza, well, you're mistaken, because Israel just announced they're going to keep building more illegal settlements in the West Bank. You know, the area, the land that belongs to Palestinians, but many of them have been driven out of their own homes by Israeli settlers as the IDF watches and essentially protects the settlers as they're carrying out these crimes. That's the West Bank I'm talking about. So just recently, Israeli ministers say 22 new Jewish settlements have been approved in the occupied West Bank, the biggest expansion in decades. Several already exist as outposts built without government authorization, but will now be made legal under Israeli law. Others are completely new, according to Defense Minister Israel Katz and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. And here's the kicker, and I want you guys to really absorb what Katz says here, because this has been the policy from the jump. Katz said the move prevents the establishment of a Palestinian state that would endanger Israel. They never would allow, and they never intended to allow, Palestinians to have their own state. That has been very clear based on the statement I just read for you now, and based on statements that, Netanyahu has made in the past. The reason why he facilitated the funding of Hamas through Qatar, he facilitated that. He did that because he knew if you have this terrorist organization in power in Gaza, well, then the international community is going to be with me in not allowing Gaza to really be its own independent state. That was the goal. And that scum of the earth guy failed to protect his own citizens on October 7th. Let's not forget that. So a lot of people will say, well, Anna, what's your solution? My solution is you guys have a powerful military. You have the Iron Dome. You have the backing of the United States. Maybe use those things to defend your country from any potential harm any other country or group might want to do. Use those weapons to defend yourselves or prevent another attack from happening. At the same time, yeah, I think Hamas needs to go. But what Israel's currently doing is essentially multiplying Hamas militants by essentially slaughtering innocent people. And that leads to the radicalization of people who might not have been interested in Hamas to begin with. But there will never be peace for Israelis unless they allow Palestinians their own statehood, period. I don't think a one-state solution honestly makes much sense. Polling of Palestinians indicates they don't want to the one state exists right now. And I think Palestinians need to have their own statehood, period. But if Israel doesn't allow it, this is never gonna end. What are they gonna do? They're gonna slaughter every last Palestinian? At this point, I wouldn't be surprised when it comes to the current Israeli government. But I think the international community has had enough. And really, the only country where there's still support for what Israel is doing is the United States, unfortunately. And guess what? Even Donald Trump is calling for a ceasefire, and that has upset that loudmouth screeching pig known as Mark Levin, who's mad at the Trump administration for calling for a ceasefire. I'm just going to give you a few comments from him where he says, in all caps, this is a social media post on X, "Why is the United States dictating to Israel how to fight Hamas? Because we're paying for it, bitch. If Israel doesn't want us to have any say over the war crimes that it's committing, then they should fund their own goddamn war. But they're not. And as long as American taxpayers are bankrolling that country, we're going to speak our minds. Period. End of story." We got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Brandy Arguay.
I want to go over to our Twitch community and read a comment from Kadra999. And I really thank you for sharing this sentiment, because I totally agree with you. Anyone acting like fentanyl isn't a problem clearly does not have someone actively in addiction in their personal lives. It is running the streets and everyone is getting addicted to it. The lie is that the drug isn't nearly as deadly as they claim, not even by a mile. But addictive and lethal over time, yes. And I agree with you. Look, it did not help when you had these goofy ass cops put out videos where like they open a trunk that allegedly has fentanyl in it and a cop like faints from an overdose. Like that kind of stuff was ridiculous. Absolutely. But the numbers don't lie. And we, at this point, have tens of thousands of Americans dying on our streets every year from fentanyl specifically. Now, there are other drugs like meth. I think it's called like biker meth. That's also really, really bad, but it's not as lethal. You're less likely to die of an overdose from that as opposed to fentanyl, but that's also killing people on the streets. But yeah, some of these policies that have been implemented in blue states have made it really difficult for people who have a family member struggling from this addiction to have avenues in which they can help that person, right? So anyway, I hope you don't have a family member who's struggling with this, but if you do, my heart goes out to you, and I hope for the best for you and your family, because it is really difficult. And I also have close friends who are dealing with something similar, and it's terrible. YTP Renewed says, Piers doesn't deserve half the hate he gets. Yeah, he sometimes gets it wrong. When you stray from conventional wisdom, you sometimes stroll down the wrong back alley. If no one strayed from conventional wisdom, we'd all stray down the wrong back alley. Look, I actually really appreciate the fact that Piers Morgan was willing to do what he did in that interview. And whatever, I get it. I'm not one of those people who holds a grudge. As long as you finally get to the right conclusion and you are willing to call out bad acts, I'll give you the credit for it. So, and by the way, the other thing I'll say about Piers Morgan is he's open-minded enough to have all these different perspectives represented on his show. And I'm sure he gets a lot of backlash for it. And I commend him for it, because it makes his show more interesting and it exposes all of us to different perspectives that we might not otherwise be exposed to. All right, we've got a few more seconds. Let's go to Michael LaMountain Sr., who's been a member for 5 months. Nobody calls me chicken. Marty McFly, I mean Donald Trump.
What are you looking at, butthead?
Oh my gosh, we have so many super chats. Okay, J-Bomb Dragon says, Trump's impulsive tariff decisions may be there to create market manipulation, but I think it also has to do with his emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation is a good way to put it. The last overdue bachelor, I'm gonna read your comment in a few, because we gotta get back to the show.
there.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Since I'm such a chatty Cathy, we don't have much time to cover a story in this segment. I'm going to read some super chats, some comments. We're going to take a break and bring Waz in to cover this fallout with Elon Musk and the Trump administration. But before we do, some comments from our super chatters, including the last overdue Bachelor, who writes, just a side update, missed super chat yesterday. CSIS, a bipartisan nonprofit, noted since 2019, deep frustration grew as Israel maintained full control. Palestinians faced half-day blackouts, contaminated water, and food shortages. This crisis didn't start on October 7th. You're right about that. You're absolutely right about that. Look, while there was certainly an occupation of Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, Israel likes to argue, no, we pulled out of Gaza. There is no occupation in Gaza. But Israel clearly had full control of everything that was going on in Gaza. Their electricity, their water, what was allowed to go in, what was allowed to come out. So when I hear these arguments about Gaza could have been such a wonderful place and they could have built it up and they could have used their resources to engage in business and international trade. They were blocked off from doing any of that. And you have to recognize that when you're making these arguments. To treat Gaza as if it was some sovereign country that had the ability to engage in international commerce and things like that, it's laughable to say the least. I mean, Palestinians in other countries who want to visit their family members in Gaza had to jump through hoops and obstacles in order to be able to do so. So thank you for raising that issue again, because I think oftentimes people do forget that this has been an ongoing conflict and the treatment of Palestinians has been just absolutely abysmal for a very, very long time. All right, the last overdue Bachelor, man, you must be stacking that paper. Thank you for the super chats. IDF and Satan Yahoo have reportedly weaponized AI drones, manipulating systems to flag innocent civilians as threats. You're right about that. Operation Daddy's Home is a good example of what you're talking about. Then their shameless mouthpieces. These blood-soaked ambassadors appear on TV to justify genocide with the biggest lies in modern history. You're right about that as well. But in this particular case, you finally have Piers Morgan shutting it down. And I appreciate that he did that. Gail writes in and says, I just want to have Bibi say, when is enough enough? Doesn't seem like it's ever going to be enough for Netanyahu, especially since he knows once the war ends, he's going to have to face those corruption charges and also the Israeli people who don't even want him in office to begin with. And by the way, they hold him responsible for failing to keep Israelis safe on October 7th, and they should. Stinky Stocking Full of Lies says, when even Piers Morgan is seeing the light, it must be obvious. They haven't been there.
Have you been there?
All right, I'll read one more and then we got to take a break. This is from Claudie 3241, who says, wish Piers would have made it a morality issue. His response to the it's legal under UN argument, he could have asked, do you think it's okay to knowingly blow up a child together with a combatant? That's a really good point. And I would venture to say no. In fact, even the US military in targeting Osama bin Laden called off an attack because they thought there would be too many civilian casualties. And the US military isn't full of doves, let's just put it that way. So the whole human shields argument, like you'll hear this, and Hotovely, in fact, made this argument in that interview or that debate. She's like, well, Hamas is using them as human shields and they know how the international community is going to react when all these children die in an airstrike that was targeted at a Hamas militant. Okay, then maybe don't do the airstrike. But they can't help themselves. They're going to do the airstrike anyway, even when they have bad intel or shaky intel on whether or not there's a Hamas combatant that's being targeted.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.